You know that kid who never really got to be a kid? The one who was making lunches, translating documents, calming down crying adults, and carrying weight that had no business being on shoulders that small. Maybe that kid was you. And if it was, something probably just shifted in your chest reading that. Because people who grew up too fast don't usually talk about it. They just keep going. That's kind of the whole thing. Today, we're diving into the psychology of people who were handed adult responsibilities before their nervous system was even finished developing. And what I'm about to share isn't just fascinating. It's going to reframe almost everything you think you know about yourself. Growing up too fast isn't just about doing chores early or having strict parents. It's a specific psychological phenomenon called parentification. That's when a child takes on emotional or functional roles that belong to adults. And according to research published in the Journal of Family Issues, parentified children don't just lose childhood experiences. They lose something far more important. They lose the neurological permission to be uncertain, to not know, to need someone else to figure it out. Think about what that means for a developing brain. Between ages 6 and 12, the prefrontal cortex is supposed to be learning through play, through failure with low stakes, through being rescued when things go wrong. But when a child is responsible for managing a household, translating for a parent, or regulating an emotionally unstable adult, the brain skips that chapter entirely. It jumps straight to threat assessment, to crisis management, to the question every parentified child learns to ask before any other. What does this person need from me right now? And that question never really goes away. People who grew up too fast often develop what psychologists call hypervigilance, masked as competence. On the outside, they look incredibly capable. They're the ones who stay calm in chaos, who see problems 3 steps before anyone else, who somehow always know exactly what to do. But underneath that capability is a nervous system that learned calmness wasn't a choice. It was a survival requirement. They weren't calm because they were confident. They were calm because someone needed them to be. And that is a completely different thing. This is why people who grew up too fast often struggle enormously with receiving help. Not just refusing it, actually struggling, physically uncomfortable when someone tries to take something off their plate, because their identity was built inside the role of the one who carries things. Needing help doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels like a threat to the only version of themselves that ever felt safe. Researchers call this compulsive self-reliance, and it shows up everywhere, in the way they handle illness alone, in the way they solve problems before asking anyone, in the way they say, "I'm fine," so automatically it doesn't even register as a lie anymore. It's not stubbornness. It's the echo of a child who learned that needing things was a burden no one had space for. And underneath all of that competence, there is a very specific kind of grief, one they usually don't recognize as grief at all. It's not grief for a person, it's grief for a version of themselves that never got to exist, the version that got to be bad at things, the version that got to throw a tantrum and have someone calmly respond to it, the version that got to be confused, scared, and small, and have an adult say, "I've got this, you don't have to worry." They grieve a softness they never got to keep, a lightness they caught glimpses of in other kids but never quite understood how to hold. And the cruelest part? Most of them feel guilty for grieving it because they look at their life and think, "I survived. Some people had it worse. What right do I have to be sad about a childhood that technically happened?" This is what psychologists call minimization as a coping mechanism. The habit of making your own pain smaller so it takes up less space. A habit that started because their pain genuinely couldn't take up space. There was no room. Someone else's crisis was always bigger. Now, let's talk about relationships. Because this is where everything gets quietly complicated. People who were parentified tend to attract one of 2 dynamics. The first is the one where they become the caretaker again, the stable one, the one who holds it together while the other person falls apart. Not because they chose dysfunction, but because emotional caretaking is the language their nervous system speaks most fluently. It's familiar, and familiar, even when it's exhausting, feels like safety. The second dynamic is more surprising. Some people who grew up too fast seek out relationships where they are finally allowed to be taken care of, and then they sabotage them. Because when someone actually shows up, when someone is actually reliable and present, something in them doesn't trust it, doesn't know how to receive it without waiting for the catch. Their nervous system was trained to expect that closeness comes with a price, that love is transactional, that safety is temporary. So they push, they test, they pull away right when things get good, not because they don't want connection, because they want it so badly it terrifies them. And when that pattern repeats enough times, they stop trying to explain it. They just quietly retreat into themselves, into the one place that never disappointed them: solitude. Not loneliness, solitude. Being alone doesn't frighten them the way it frightens people who need constant external validation. They built an entire inner world as children because the outer one was too demanding. Books, music, daydreams, long walks, hours spent just thinking. That inner world became the only space that was truly theirs, and they protect it fiercely. But that same retreat, the one that saved them as children, can become a trap as adults. The walls that once protected start to keep people out permanently. They convince themselves they prefer it this way, that they don't need anyone, that solitude is a choice, not a default. And sometimes it is. But sometimes it's just the most sophisticated way they've found to avoid getting hurt again. This is the part nobody says out loud. The independence that looks so admirable from the outside is sometimes just old fear wearing a more acceptable costume. And the body keeps score of all of it. Childhood that moves too fast lives in the nervous system, not just the memory. People who were parentified often carry chronic tension in their shoulders, their jaw, their stomach. They have a hair trigger stress response. They get sick when they finally slow down because their body has been running on high alert for so long that stillness itself feels like a malfunction. Trauma researchers increasingly recognize this as somatic memory. The body remembers roles the mind has moved past, which is why understanding what happened isn't enough. The nervous system needs evidence repeated over time that the emergency is actually over, that no one needs saving today, that it's allowed to stop scanning. Research on post-traumatic growth, particularly the work of psychologist Richard Tedeschi, shows that people who endured early responsibility often develop an unusually high capacity for empathy. Not the surface-level kind, the kind that reads a room the moment you walk in, the kind that notices the slight shift in someone's voice before they've said a word, the kind that knows the difference between someone who's fine and someone who's performing fine, because they've performed it themselves 1,000 times. This isn't a skill they learned. It's a skill they were forced to grow early because their survival depended on reading the adults around them accurately. And that hyper-empathy becomes both their greatest strength and their deepest wound, because they feel everything for everyone, and they were never taught that they were allowed to feel something just for themselves. Here's what rarely gets acknowledged about these people. Underneath all the capability, the competence, the calm and chaos, there is often a very young part of them still sitting on the floor, still waiting, not for rescue, just for someone to notice, to say without being asked, "I see how long you've been carrying this. You don't have to explain it. I just see it."
They don't talk about this. They've learned not to. Because somewhere along the way, usually without anyone saying it directly, they absorbed the message that their needs were the least urgent ones in the room. And that belief, quiet and stubborn and deeply lodged, is the actual thing that needs to change. Not their habits, not their patterns, not their attachment style or their communication or their walls. The belief underneath all of it, the one that says, "I am the one who gives." Needing is for other people, because the truth is simple and uncomfortable at the same time. You cannot keep giving from a place that was never filled. You can sustain it for years, decades even.
But something always gives eventually, and it's usually the person themselves. So if this is you, if you recognize that child in the kitchen, the one making lunches and calming adults and never once being asked how they were doing, then maybe the work isn't about becoming stronger or more healed or more whole. Maybe it's just about letting one person, one safe person, see the weight, not to take it, just to witness it. Because after a lifetime of being the one who holds things together, being truly seen is not a small thing. It's everything. If this hit home, please subscribe. And if you want to support these deep dives, hit that join button to become a channel member.